Great. And is yours on, Debbie? Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's just a couple minutes past 7. Thought we'd wait to, it's 7:01 according to my trusty smartphone. And thank you, Debbie. We got a last minute glitch there. This is a different format. This is a webinar format. And so we've done a lot of Zoom fellowship times and coffee hour and even communion by Zoom here at PCMK. But this particular event is what we call a webinar. And so, you know how kind of distracting it can be when there's lots of images flashing around Zoom and people talking and cutting out and this and that. So at the webinar format, you'll just see the presenters, who are Debbie and myself, of course. And you won't see each other in this particular event. But it was fun to see the folks I did see there. I'm not sure why some videos came through live and the others didn't, but that's how we'll do this. Just want to just kind of chit chat for a couple more minutes because I don't want to have to repeat instructions, and I'm not sure people are still joining as we speak here. We keep having some people join us. In fact, my Zoom expert, Tim Clem, there just joined. I see. So it's great to see. Tim's even on vacation and still took time to join in tonight. And folks may join during the hour, but that's the other thing too. You won't see people coming and going as we are on this Zoom call together. Okay, well, once again, just want to welcome and welcome you to our webinar this evening. Kind of the first, we hope, of several to talk about issues of racism in America that we've all been kind of woken up in a sense after the death of George Floyd. And then since then, Breonna Taylor and others, too many that we have seen in the last few years. But somehow this one's caught our attention, and it's a good thing, I think, that we are paying attention now. And no one better than Debbie to help us get a start on this conversation together. I wanted to tell you how this webinar format works a little bit, and then we'll introduce Debbie and begin our evening together. We're going to discuss the format of the evening a bit together. So with the webinar, as I said, the only cameras that are active are Debbie's and mine, and you can choose, probably the best setting for you is, you could try gallery view. I'm not sure how that's going to work on your device, or active speaker, and then it'll alternate between Debbie or me, whoever's doing the speaking. Or you can actually go into your settings and maybe turn on something called hide non-video participants. And then you won't see all the other white little backgrounds you get of faces, the little outlines of people from various folks that are online. But like I said, maybe the active speaker view is best, or try your gallery view, see how that works on your device. Okay, the chat is active, and how we'll do this is like if we were in a classroom setting at the church, or you're in some place where you went to some lecture or presentation. Debbie and I will have the presentation first, but we certainly want to leave time for questions. And the way we'll have questions is the chat feature. And if you are familiar with Zoom, you know where chat is. And if not, tap your screen if you've got a touch screen, or move your cursor around if you're on a laptop or computer, and find your, can you take care of that too, Debbie?
Yep.
Okay. And so whenever you want to send in a question, and the questions will only come to me, so you don't have to worry about everyone else seeing all your questions, or maybe you'd like that, but the way we're doing it tonight is questions will come to me. Actually, you could choose between Debbie or me as Debbie's co-host of the meeting, but why don't you go ahead and leave it on the default setting, which is questions will come to me, and I'll monitor them as we go through the evening together, and we'll save time towards the end for questions. Mainly of Debbie, of course, then she's the expert, not me so much on this topic. So that'll be fun. We'll go through this together in our first webinar. I want to make sure I shared everything about Zoom and the format of the meeting and so on. We'll talk for about 45 to 50 minutes, something like that, and then try to save time at the end. We certainly don't want to go much more than an hour and 15, or I think the Zoom call will die at 1:30. So let's make sure we're done by then. And it's bedtime for a lot of us, right, Debbie? Okay, great. Yeah, I mean for the old folks. Okay, I just wanted to share sort of a disclaimer as we start an event like this. PCMK has certainly taken a stand on numerous issues, including this issue. We declared that we believe Black Lives Matter, and we put those signs out on the road and encourage you to take one. We endorse the statement, or encourage watching the statement by J. Herbert Nelson of our denomination as he reflected on the police killings in recent years in our country. And then we also participated in a vigil in our town. And so we have certainly taken a stand. But what Debbie and I talk about tonight are our opinions and our viewpoints, and not necessarily the official position of the church, which of course, I just wanted to say that up front so you can recognize that we're speaking on our own behalf. But proud of what the session has done so far on this issue, and even the fact that we're gathering here tonight. I'm just so pleased that we're part of a church that wants to make a difference in the world and have an impact, as our core values and our mission statement state. Well, let me have the distinct privilege of introducing to you our speaker for tonight, Debbie Southorn. I wanted to just share a couple things about Debbie, and then I wanted to say a couple things to kind of start our conversation off together. Known Debbie her whole life. And she has been a wonderful, dear daughter and part of our family. And, I was thinking how we teach our children everything we know for about maybe 18 years. Maybe they stop listening somewhere around there, 17, 18 years. And then we spend the rest of our lives letting them teach us. And that is certainly what has been happening with Debbie in the last 15 years of our life as she's been going through college and her adult life. She has been a joy to get to know. Debbie and I have had some fun travels together where we've encountered issues around the world, even to Palestine, Israel-Palestine in 2007. I wanted to share a little anecdote, which is going to embarrass Debbie and she'll be mad at me, but it's kind of fun. We were meeting with a group of activists on this trip that we were going together. People were coming from the United States, mainly from Colorado, with a group called Friends of Seville. And these are activist folks, and a lot of them, as they shared they asked us to write down some thoughts to introduce ourselves, and you pass that to someone else and they'll introduce the person next to them or something. And so we all wrote something, and these people, most were writing, I was arrested at a nuclear protest, and I chained myself to the fence of the power plant. These people that have had these lives of activism. And Debbie was a freshman in college, and she wrote, just having a sense of humor, she wrote, I like Dr. Pepper and nachos, Doritos.
Diet Dr. Pepper and Doritos.
My point in sharing that was Debbie has a sense of humor. Plus, she was kind of embarrassed at the time. Wait a minute, I don't stack up against all of these folks who've spent a lifetime of activism. Well, Debbie, you've got a very impressive resume now. And in that setting, you would be able to share a lot more interesting things that you have done in your life, there in Chicago especially, but in college before that. We're so proud of you. Well, you saw the bio of Debbie in the email that went out, and you get a sense of her, and she will introduce herself a little more fully in a moment and her journey. But I just thought I'd just share a couple of comments or thoughts to get us started tonight and give you a sense of kind of the direction we want to go together. I came across a quote recently from Rabbi Joachim Prinz, who spoke at the March on Washington, March for Jobs on Washington in 1963. The famous MLK I Have a Dream speech was part of that day. But just before Dr. King spoke, Rabbi Prinz spoke, and he said, the biggest problem is not bigotry and hatred. The biggest problem facing America is silence. And Dr. King, of course, said similar things in his letters from a Birmingham jail. And then recently, a more contemporary author, Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, says that white progressives, who I think maybe most of us here today would think of ourselves as white progressives, cause the most damage to people of color. So it's important that we, who we are in our sense station in life, engage this issue and learn and grow and help be a part of the change that we hope is coming in America. So we'll give Debbie a few minutes to introduce herself and her journey, and then we will kind of look around some thoughts around the question, what is different this time? What is it about the death of George Floyd, or what is in the air right now that seems to have just propelled America to look at this issue more deeply than we have? We've had lots of other killings, lots of other issues, but why is this time seem to have caught and held our attention? And then, and so what is the issue? What is the problem? And kind of dig a little deeper into so many facets to the issue we can explore, but Debbie's got a lot of great thoughts she'll share with us around what is the problem in America today. And then we'll kind of move towards why should we care? Or what can we do as individuals, as a church perhaps, and just reflect on that a little bit together, because again, Debbie's had a lot of experience in community organizing, seeing churches that are doing active things and helpful things. So we want to learn from her experience in that as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to my daughter, of whom I am very proud, and let her introduce herself and her journey, and I'll stop talking.
I love it. Thanks, Dad. Well, he started with some disclaimers, so I get to start with a couple disclaimers. One is, of course, I'm incredibly grateful to be here, humbled that my dad invited me to share some thoughts. And if you could have told 18-year-old me that we'd be here today, I'm not sure if I would have believed you. But on that note, I'm just sharing some of my own thoughts and reflections on my experiences after a decade of community organizing, especially around issues of police violence. But I'm not a representative of the movement. I'm one person who's lucky to have that time and these experiences. Particularly, I've been shaped by some really powerful other young Black organizers who've been at the forefront of these demands. And so just saying that, I'm just one person. I'm still in my own journey of anti-racism, right? Especially as a white person in this country, there isn't an end point. There isn't a point at which we become sort of experts or done. But I certainly consider myself at least trying to practice my values of anti-racism, and also of just being in right relationship, right, with the people around us and with our environment. So I have to say I'm grateful to the people who've invested in me and my learning and growth to be able to have some offerings to share, and just grateful that y'all are interested in hearing my dad and I talk at each other a little this evening. This will be interesting. But yeah, he asked me to share a little bit about my journey. How did I go from sort of a white suburban kid to, well, I'm still a white kid, but now I live in the city and have spent the last 10 years really trying to learn about how to be involved in and contribute to social change, and particularly racial justice movements in this country. And so I think, for folks who don't know, right, I grew up in Tigard, Oregon, where both my parents worked in churches, and I was a pretty happy kid that was in church 3-4 times a week, being steeped in sort of ethics of service and compassion, right? Community building was the stuff of life, because it was just what we did all the time. But I think I also was pretty profoundly shaped by 9/11. Happened when I was in 8th grade, and then all of high school and college and my adulthood now, young adulthood, we've been involved in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I felt like when the war in Iraq started was a big moment for me of just feeling disconnected to resistance. Like, war is bad. Why is this still happening, even though people are protesting? But I personally wasn't connected to those protests, right? To me, protests sounded like this scary thing that other people did. I went to college at a tiny liberal arts school called Willamette University, where I was convinced I was going to become a music teacher and then go back and teach at my same high school. At 16, I was like set. I was like, I got life figured out. Here we go. And sometimes I laugh at how cliche I am because I went to college and then got politicized. But It was where I was sort of encountered and first was confronted by the realities of like systemic power, right? So my heart was in the right place, but I just hadn't really had the tools to start to understand and unpack, like, how did things get to be the way that they are? And in particular, my freshman year, there was some student organizing on campus. There's a group called Concerned Students for Social Justice, mostly students of color, but it was a multiracial group with white student support, which kind of felt like necessary because my school was 87% white. So you can imagine that students of color had a pretty isolating and profoundly different experience than white students there. And they organized a walkout. So they were knocking on the doors of every class on Monday morning, encouraging people to come join them in the quad to learn about basically how our school needed to do better on race, right? We had no tenured professors of color whatsoever. To this day, I'm not sure if Willamette does, among other things, right? There was no sort of student center for students of color to get particular forms of support. And I was 18 and sleepy. It was an 8 a.m. Spanish class, and I was confused. I did not understand what this kid reading this manifesto was so mad about. But my professor at the time said, anyone who wants to go with them, I won't penalize you, but I'm going to keep teaching. And I was like, sweet, I'll go see what's up. Maybe I'll go grocery shopping afterwards. And I say some of this to say, right, like someone organized me. I got invited in. I'm not so special that I just went out and tried to find this. And pretty quickly after listening to some of these testimonies of young people on the megaphone talking about what campus was like for them, my mind was blown, because in my first couple months, I just thought this place was the bee's knees and had never experienced the kinds of sort of profiling and sort of doubt and questioning and what a lot of people today will refer to as like microaggressions, right? So that kind of launched me into taking an ethnic studies program, which was my dad's real favorite. I had a professor who used to be a racial justice trainer. She was a community organizer who became a professor. So she used all her trainings with us, and really got me to interrogate my family's history. Like, how did I get to be where I am today? Yes, sure, I'm great and awesome. And were there some things in place that meant I had a leg up? And it was really pretty life-altering and humbling for me to realize that actually whiteness did play a big role in me getting to where I was. And that was also the first time I really started to understand that racism isn't just like bias or prejudice, right? We grew up learning, especially in like 90s America, that like, oh, the civil rights movement happened. And so if you're racist, that means you're like bad, right? We're not racist, we like everybody. And realizing that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Racism is about structural power combined with bias. And yeah, so fast forward to, I've, spent some time in Palestine, had pretty profound experiences that again deepened for me the reality that there's the haves and the have-nots in this world, and the haves have because the have-nots don't have, and you got to pick a side and figure out which side you're on, and how are you going to break down walls, or are you going to accept walls? I came to Chicago right after graduating college because my parents had moved to Erie, and I was not going to live in Erie, but I found an AmeriCorps job in Chicago, and right away, again, was humbled by learning the realities of life for 16 and 17-year-old, mostly Black youth on the west side of the city, navigating things without economic support that I wouldn't have to confront for another decade, right? Having to help pay rent, having to help raise kids, having to help put food on the table, having to work 2-3 jobs in addition to going to high school. And in addition to sort of all these experiences, when I really finally got pulled into a lot of the work that I'm doing today, was I was brought into a project called Chain Reaction, Alternatives to Calling the Police on Young People, by a visionary woman named Miriam Kaba, as part of an organization called Project Nia, where I really started to be confronted with the realities that everything about what we call carceral systems, so prisons, policing, and surveillance, is all upholding the status quo, is upholding economic justice, is upholding anti-Blackness, and really one of the core ways that we can transform conditions in this country is if we fundamentally alter the ways that law enforcement and the criminal legal system happen. And so that was kind of the first project that I got pulled into, talking to young people about their experiences with policing and how it initiates a chain reaction that often led to incarceration or homelessness or losing jobs, losing relationships, and how people could start practicing not calling the police on young people. Fast forward 10 years now, and there's a mass popular conversation around not calling the police, right? That is absolutely critical. And so, yeah, I could go on, but I think those are some of the key moments that really pulled me in and helped shape me. And I'll probably share more about the more recent efforts as we get into some of the other questions.
Debbie, that's great. Maybe just as a quick example of not calling the police, I should know these names. Richard, the man killed in Atlanta. And, you know, there's an example of man sleeping in his car in the parking lot. Call the police, and that's how it ends up. Whereas, is there not some other way that could have been handled? A good case in point for that conversation. Excellent, Debbie. Yeah, what a journey you have been on, and again, so proud of you, and I'm learning from you every day. So Debbie, yeah, you've been immersed in Chicago and the scenes in Chicago. I'll never forget being with you in the car as Charlottesville was happening. We were driving somewhere with you, and we were in Chicago that week, and to see you, you know, on your phone, talking to people and young people around the country, tweeting, texting, online, that there's, you know, I see it on the evening news and then I forget about it, but it's your world and you live in it. And so thank you for sharing some of your experience with us tonight, because we all can learn from it. So Debbie, let's get into why we're here tonight as opposed to, you know, 6 months ago, or it's only been 2 months. Maybe it was 2 months today or something like that. It was Memorial Day, Monday, Memorial Day, that George Floyd was killed. So what do you think about this time that has held our attention at least a little bit longer than usual? We'll wait and see if really can make a difference. We're trying, but what do you think's different this time, and the pros and cons of the fact that people are paying more attention right now?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts. I think one is, for a lot of people, it's not new, right, to pay attention and to know the names of someone killed by police, right? I mean, since Laquan McDonald and Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, and all the names that we learned in 2014 and 2015, right? There's been a steady continuation of police killings. Around 1,000 people a year are killed by police. And there's been steady and consistent organizing in response. And in Chicago, that looked like work supporting justice for the family of Rakia Boyd, a 22-year-old Black woman killed by a police officer in 2012. Supporting Pierre Laurie's family, a 16-year-old killed by the police, Chad Robertson, who was shot in the back by an Amtrak police station. So many stories, right? And so I just have to say that for many people, it's continued. It didn't go away and then come back. It's continued. The difference is the popular response and the grassroots organizing, and particularly just the young people in the streets, the people that are making sure that this time, right, things actually change. I think some of what is different in this moment? Well, one, we can't rule out the pandemic, the reality that 40 million people are newly uninsured, right? Also, everyone's been cooped up in their homes for months. And so you already have conditions that I think make people more willing to join street protests that maybe wouldn't have in the past, especially non-Black people who are like, hey, like maybe the system isn't so great after all if it needs to get bailed out every less than 10 years, right? And isn't actually keeping me safe either. But the other thing that feels really, really different is that the last time around, all of the responses that people proposed as solutions, right, actually added resources to the police. And this is one of the things we tried to be really clear and insistent on. I was organizing with a group called We Charge Genocide at the time of Mike Brown's killing. There was a young person in Chicago named Dominique Franklin who had been killed by the police after he stole a bottle of vodka from a Walgreens. And that vodka was his basically rent to be able to sleep on someone's couch that night. And they tased him. And he was close friends with a lot of my friends. And so Miriam Kaba, again, sort of an elder and visionary in our community, brought people together to say, how are we going to honor Damo? And we actually ended up fundraising to send 8 majority Black young people to the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, to actually submit a report about Chicago police violence against youth of color, calling it torture. And it got uplifted by the UN Committee Against Torture. They said Damo's name. This was before we eventually were able to get the Department of Justice to investigate. And one of the things that we were really clear about after Mike Brown was killed was we don't want solutions that actually give more resources to the police, because in the long run, what we need is to make policing irrelevant. Communities need to have the resources they need to survive so that crime and harm aren't happening in the first place, right? Police can only ever respond, and even then aren't doing a very good job of it, right? If we are accepting that their job is to like keep people safe. We'll come back to that in a second because history tells us it's something else. And so these solutions were, what were they? They were body cameras. They were better training for the police. They were consent decrees, right? Most of the major cities have had consent decrees now. Can you think of any of the other ones? Tasers instead of guns. But like we kept saying, because Damo was killed by a taser, like that's still traumatic and it's still a weapon, right? Even batons, like, a police baton can do a lot of damage. And in the last 2 months, I've personally seen, I can't even count how many people bleeding from their heads, and then had at least 4 friends get concussions, but while just standing, right, at a protest. That's, again, I'm getting a little besides the point because there's some fresh and recent memories that I'm speaking to. But so the difference now is that I think more people have recognized that these little tweaks and changes to departments aren't actually going to bring about the kind of transformative change that Black communities have been demanding since before Mike Brown, right? And then in order to do that, we actually have to figure out how do we like take away some of the resources from policing and put it into other things in the first place. And a really helpful tool for that actually was made by some folks out of Oakland called Critical Resistance. And they just talk about how do you notice if something's actually going to grow a police department over time versus if it's going to take away some of that power so that the power can go back into communities and into people. So that feels different this time, that more people are saying, actually, yeah, maybe the issue isn't just that police are doing policing wrong. Maybe the issue is that policing is the problem. And what if Black lives were invested in first?
So Debbie, is there, to get back to the sort of the big picture, where policing is obviously that where this started and the heart of the issue as far as where you're working. What do you think when you see NASCAR ban Confederate flags, or Washington Redskins finally, after vowing to never, ever, ever change the name? Okay, we'll change the name. Is that something positive, or is that tokenism towards let's do some cosmetic changes and keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to the power of this moment and how scared people in power are of the potential for the kind of change that would actually shake up their day-to-day, right? I think it's usually a good sign when your movement gets co-opted. When elected officials start saying what you've been saying, it means you've been relatively successful. You have to stay vigilant, because usually then they're going to slide in some nonsense with it. And I do think that, policing as an issue is at the heart of the sort of crisis of anti-Blackness and of racial injustice and a history of white supremacy in this country. So it's not surprising to me that there's also, right, conversations and responses that deal with the history of the Confederate flag and Confederate symbols and symbols of open racism. And at the same time that we have the Black Lives Matter movement, sort of, out here making waves, we also are seeing an incredible resurgence. And again, I should be careful to say resurgence, because I know organizing has been ongoing. We're seeing an incredibly powerful movement by indigenous communities in this country and on this land, I should say, to stop pipelines through their territories and through sacred spaces. I mean, they shut down Trump's access to Mount Rushmore on July 4th. And I think what we're dealing with is a real reckoning with our history in this country, right? It was stolen land and stolen people, but in service of creating sort of the American dream for white people. And different sort of ethnic white communities got pulled into that over time. And we've seen that it's not actually sustainable, right? There's been constant rebellion and resistance to the idea that can work, that we can have a society that works for some but not others.
Debbie, I wanted to touch on BLM itself as a phrase, as a buzzword or phrase, and yet as a movement. And how do you feel as you see Black Lives Matter Square in Washington painted on Fifth Avenue? We put a sign out front of our church. Is that positive, or is that again missing the point?
So it's all over the place. So first off, right, giving credit where credit's due, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tomemi are three queer Black women who were were some of the first to use that phrase, Black Lives Matter, right? After, was it actually after Trayvon Martin was killed?
It may have been, yeah.
Yeah.
Or Michael Brown, perhaps.
No, Michael Brown the response to Michael Brown was the Ferguson uprising, but I actually think Black Lives Matter as a sort of a phrase was being used a little bit before that. It's brilliant. How can you not agree with that? If you don't agree with that, you're literally saying you don't think Black life matters. So I think it's brilliant because it makes people choose a side. As much as I appreciate the peacemakers among us, and actually my job is for a peace building program, right? I think that the only true peace involves justice. And whenever we're talking about issues of justice, there's people who have power and people who don't. So Black Lives Matter is brilliant because it states it very clearly. The problem, right, with the ways corporations and elected officials are now able to just put that slogan on everything is that they haven't yet had to fundamentally change their programming or their services, right? Bill de Blasio just expanded the jail. Well, he's closing Rikers to create a whole bunch of new mini jails that's going to involve an even more massive budget all over the city, right? He's given more and more resources to policing. The tiny cuts he did make to the police budget were symbolic at best. So yeah, it's insulting, but again, it shows that we have them on the run. And I think particularly what's most exciting about Black Lives Matter signs is when they are in smaller places they haven't been before, and they encourage people to talk and have discourse. I'm a big believer that the ways people change are not actually just through like reading a book or having a conversation. People learn through action. People learn through experience. And so even just the experience of dealing with the backlash to having signs up is a powerful experience. So I think it's all useful. I want people to keep doing it. I just think we have to be wary of the co-optation that does come with achieving visibility.
Right. You wondered how, must feel sometimes when you've been living in that world and then you see it become almost a corporate branding enhancement of your brand to put out Black Lives Matter. We were sincere as we put it out, and one of our thoughts was we believe, because we wanted to put it in the context of faith and what it is about our faith. We believe this. We believe that Black Lives Matter, and we wanted to even maybe add to God and to us. Black Lives Matter, to God, to us, and so on. And then we put a cross the bottom in the name of the church, so that encourage folks in the church to maybe put one in their lawn in their neighborhood. And then, like you said, start that conversation of, why do you have that in your lawn? And do you really believe that stuff? And so yeah, and we could get on the sidetrack there, because of course some people want to respond and say, well, all lives matter, or this matters, or that matters. And right now we're focusing on Black Lives Matter, and not just all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter, all life matters, the planet matters, everything matters. But with that statement, we're saying Black Lives Matter. And Debbie, I wanted to comment that you brought to my awareness something that I've now started to notice other folks are trying to distinguish between the phrase people of color and Black people. Because when we say people of color, that's a huge range, and we just put everyone in that category together. And yes, there's times to use that phrase that could be helpful, but to distinguish between Black lives and people of color. You're the first to kind of wake me up to that distinction. And is that part of where we are today, is we're focusing on Black lives, not necessarily all people of color, although there are, like you said, issues in the Indigenous community and the Latinx community and so on. So, but thank you for that. That's a helpful corrective in this discussion. So I think from my perspective, I think there was something shocking about 8 minutes and 46 seconds. We've seen other things, people shot in the back, and it's a couple of seconds and over. I don't know, there's something about that look on that police officer's face and people standing around while a man was choking to death on the ground. But you're right, there've been countless repetitions of that story. But it was powerful, did have an impact, and it has, I like to use the phrase, forced America to look in the mirror, and forced all of us to look in the mirror related to these issues. And so here we are today, probably because of this, at least at this point in time. So what is the problem, Debbie? What are, before we see police killings on TV, and the last few years where racism has become like Charlottesville and other things have happened, that we're forced to look at racism again more. We were feeling pretty good, weren't we? We elected our first African-American president. We had the civil rights movement, and we had, we were post-racial society, weren't we? We thought things were pretty good. Wow, we're really living in a pipe dream, or is what is going on in America today that really was going on all along, but we just didn't, we thought we were in a much more hopeful or comfortable place a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you were living in a pipe dream, is the short answer of that. And again, there's so many other people who can speak to this better than I can, and with more nuance, and it's well documented, right? But I think in many ways, policing is the focal point, because again, because police uphold the status quo, any other issue that you organize on or organize around, if it's housing justice, right? We have 6 times as many empty houses in this country as we do people without homes. How does anyone sleep at night knowing that, right? Food justice issues. There's whole areas, at least in Chicago, where you can't get fresh fruits and vegetables, much less not brand name or organic produce or organic foods or anything like that. People refer to them as food deserts. There's environmental justice issues, all of which, right, have sort of racial implications, all of which, right, are part of everyday life for especially like poor and low income Black communities and communities of color. I think in many ways, another thing that's shifted in the last few years is the Trump administration has accelerated open attacks against communities of color, right? We had the Muslim ban, preventing people from certain countries from coming here. We've seen the dramatic expansion and acceleration of an already terrifying deportation and detention machine for undocumented immigrants, with the opening of literal camps for families and children, where people are still daily sitting and dying, right? And that includes Black immigrants. I think 1/4 of all families in detention in this country are Haitian. And that kind of gets erased because the popular discourse likes to imagine that these issues are separate according to different racial groups. But the reality is that people don't live single issue lives, right? People are facing multiple crises at once and at the same time. But yeah, so unemployment, right, has dramatically increased. And there's sort of this cycle, right, of like, how are you supposed to get employment if you don't have an education? But how are you supposed to get a good education if you don't have housing? But how are you supposed to get housing if you don't have an employment? How are you supposed to get employment if you don't have an education? How are you going to get education if you don't? Right, and it continues, and it's violent. It's systemic violence, right? The news loves to cover interpersonal and intercommunal violence because that grabs headlines, but the news doesn't ask, did the person who did that harmful thing, did they have somewhere to sleep last night? Did they have a good meal early in that day? Oh, something bad happened to them and they were angry. Did they have someone they could sit down and talk to about that? Right. And all of these things are made worse by police who've become the first responders to everything in this society. Someone is walking around homeless on the streets, making somebody feel uncomfortable. Who do you call? You call the police, who then take them away and disappear them for you. Somebody's overdosing on a drug. Who do you call? Well, you could call an ambulance, but they'll still send police. And then that person's going to go to jail instead of to treatment, or their only access to treatment is going to be through jail. I've been lucky enough to support a lot of young people who are organizing to get police officers out of their schools, right? In theory, everyone likes to say that cops are there to prevent mass shootings, but as we saw with Parkland, it's not the case. There was an officer there, he went running, right? And what they are literally paid to do, it says in the contract in Chicago, is patrol, right? And that money could go to counselors, right? We spend $33 million a year. Our schools actually pay our police department $33 million for officers to patrol the hallways. And we have a counseling program for the entire high school system in the city gets $8 million. How is that conscionable, right? So again, policing in and of itself, I think is the focal point, both because there's these dramatic moments of highly visible death, like with George Floyd, right? People unfortunately are moved by trauma and by death. But there's like slow death happening regularly because of economic injustice, that that also police play a role in because of how many resources they get. In Chicago, the police department gets 40% of our discretionary funds. Substance abuse treatment gets $9 million a year. The Chicago police get $4.5 million a day. Mental health services get about $40 million a year. That's 10 days of policing, right? Homelessness services are similar, around 40 million. Again, the things we prioritize, unfortunately, are not actually about Black life. It's about Black containment, Black control. And yeah, and again, I think it all comes back to history. When have we ever reconciled for how this country was founded? And we haven't. With the civil rights movement, we won a lot. There was a lot of shifts that happened. Integration was huge. The Voting Rights Act was huge. Outlawing discrimination was huge. But there was still never what many people are calling for, which is reparations. We never saw the majority of Black people whose family members had been enslaved never got 40 acres and a mule, right? So how are you supposed to pretend there was an equal starting point? And we know that the history of our police and prison system very much grew out of the system of when slavery ended. There needed to be a new way to control sort of this undesired population. The first police were white people who were paid by slave owners to go catch potential runaway enslaved people. And the first prisons were mostly for indentured servants, but okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting...
No, that's good, that's great. No, I just, a couple thoughts I wanted to pick up on was, I was in Ohio recently, as you know, with our friend Debbie Whaley and on the Ohio River there, the Underground Railroad, and recognizing how dangerous it was. Ohio was technically a free state, but it was dangerous to help escape slaves. And the Presbyterian Church in two different towns we saw it were part of the Underground Railroad. That was a dangerous thing to do because most neighbors didn't want you helping those folks. You know, they didn't want them in their town. They didn't maybe agree with slavery, but they didn't want them in their town. So that, and then, you know, the 13th Amendment, of course, outlawed slavery, except for criminal punishment. And there's a lot of folks who see the connection to mass incarceration, to a logical connection there. And so that was, and in fact, I wanted to ask you specifically about mass incarceration and policing. And are those obviously just two poles of the same issue, or does one feed the other, vice versa? Because this church has really taken on prisons in both a compassionate and just caring for folks in prison kind of way, and also trying to learn about the causes of the kind of numbers we see in this country compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And before you respond, Debbie, just real quick, I want to just encourage people to use the chat feature and start sending some questions in our way, and we'll start see if you have some questions for Debbie as we move to that time in our time together. But mass incarceration and policing and the connection there.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think the obviously they're connected, right? And what I've learned the ways I've learned to understand their connections is by understanding the whole system of what we call the prison industrial complex. And so it's the ways that policing, prisons, and surveillance, right, all work together to create a system that's about control, containment, and confinement of Black people, of immigrants, of LGBTQ people, of people deemed sort of marginalized or the other in some way. But its origins really are around controlling Black communities in this country. And they all play different roles, right? I think police is more visible because we see them on the streets, we see them in communities. And realistically, though, the ways that you probably witness and experience policing, Dad, in Westchester is probably a little different than the policing that I see. And when I'm, spending time with youth, or even just walking around my block. I live on the north side of Chicago, but still police play a similar role throughout all parts of the city. But we see them, right? They're officers that are out here in the midst of and responding to different situations, and you authorized to use force, right? And then prisons are where people go. They're where they're contained, where they're warehoused. And surveillance is the ways that we all participate in keeping this going together. And we got to undo all of that. I remember I'm trying to remember her name. I think it was Paula Rojas, talks about how we have to undo the cops in our heads, but also the cops in our hearts. So the cops in the streets, the cops in our heads, and the cops in our hearts. How do we stop looking at people as problems and start looking at people as people?
Debbie, I was hoping,
especially people in crisis.
Right, and we've heard so many stories. We heard our own young people share at the vigil. Three of the young girls from our church shared being Black in America, being Black in this community, walking home from CVS with a bag of snacks, and the police stopped them to ask where are they going, what are they doing, and she was scared. She was just scared after everything she's seen. And I shared you this story of my seminary professor, a distinguished, educated Black man who lived in San Anselmo, California, walking in a Tony neighborhood of Ross, where all the celebrities in Marin County. And I walk in that neighborhood, no one ever stopped me. He walks in that neighborhood and they stop him. What are you doing here? So, just some of the anecdotes of the way police interact with people of color in our communities, and pretty, basic stuff that's different growing up Black in America for sure. I've got a couple of questions here, Debbie, and be thinking of, make sure you make some of the points you want to make, but had some good questions here. The numbers you got, Debbie, is like funding and budgets and so on. Is some of that in some of those links you sent, or can you?
I haven't sent them yet, but I can send some of those.
And not even necessarily right now, but make that available to me, and I could make it available to people.
Mm-hmm.
And then that same person, Aaron, asking about resources, ways to get more involved locally and to be more active in these movements. So we'll move to that part here in a minute. If you were to, here's from someone, Ann Carpenter. Debbie, we know you've worked a lot with youth in Chicago. If you were to identify the single most important space for youth to put their efforts and power, what would that be? Demanding a more historically accurate curriculum in their school? Whatever, where should young people be saying, we need this to make a difference?
I mean, that's up to them. And one of the things that I've been so grateful to be able to do is support young people in developing their own ability to speak truth to power on the issues that are important to them. And so I've seen young people work on, getting rid of racist teachers at their school. Right now, we're seeing an incredible effort by young people to get police out of Chicago public schools. So that's at cops@outcps.com. There's actually a lot of youth, right, who are supporting this effort, and sort of big demand to defund police and invest in their communities instead. And that feels like a really important demand to support. I kind of wanted to show it's about a 2-minute video, just showing, I think, trying to emphasize that, again, this isn't new. Even though a lot of people might be hearing about this idea of divesting from policing, divesting from our criminal punishment system, and investing that instead in the things that make people safe in the first place, that's an idea that's been around for a minute. And the reason that it's popular right now is because we're facing a massive crisis. And for once, there was a sort of a visionary idea for how to solve it that actually that actually managed to get more traction than what the other side might say, right? Naomi Klein has a great video she made about what she called COVID capitalism. And she talks a lot about the ways that crises are opportunities. They're opportunities for change. The far right knows that and has used crisis again and again and again to consolidate their power and their wealth, and make conditions worse for the majority of us living on this planet, right? We used to talk about the concentration of wealth as a triangle, right? With millionaires at the top and everybody else down here. Nowadays, it's like a plumber. Wait, no, what do you call it? Plunger, sorry.
Plunger.
It's like a plunger, right? Where you have such extreme wealth that's just unconscionable, and then the majority of people actually. And so I think this moment is so important for white communities, especially white communities that identify as middle class, to recognize, like, this is the way the world is going. We're going to continue to see the stratification of wealth. Which side are we going to be on? Are we going to be on the side that says this isn't okay and we want to shift this? Or are we going to pretend that this can work for us when we've seen time and time again that it's not going to work? It's going to crumble, because how I don't know, plungers, they fall over easily. Maybe not, maybe they have the suction. But so I'm just going to show a brief video of a campaign I was really, really proud to be a part of with some young people who speak to the root causes of the issues affecting their community and why they were organizing to try to stop the city from spending nearly $100 million on a new building for police. Oh, there we go. Share computer sound. All right. So you can see my screen. I don't know how to make the video full screen. Here we go.
You're already closing all our schools. You're taking away our mental health facilities. You're literally draining our neighborhoods. That's literally what you're doing of all our resources. Build a cop academy in place of these resources, which the police do not help in these neighborhoods. They usually contribute to violence because they're killing people, they're harassing people.
Like my neighborhood, is no grocery stores over here. We're a food desert. There are a bunch of schools getting shut down, then the mental health clinics, and now that just leaves people out with nothing to do or being a danger to themselves and their community, when if we had those resources, we wouldn't even need the police to try to stop those people, because they would have resources that will already be in place to help them. They believe that it will bring jobs, and it really won't. It will bring a very low percentage of jobs. It will be more police, which would mean people are scared, because people are scared of the police.
So many schools that are underfunded on the west side. There is only really one big mental health facility, and it's private. You can hear stories about people and how scared they are to go into this one facility because it's giant, it's overpacked, it's under-resourced. A lot of these killings that are happening, they're killing people or they're arresting people off the streets, and a lot of these people have mental health issues, mostly because there are no mental health facilities open that they can go to.
We were watched by the police, and they weren't trying to let us go to the bathroom. They weren't trying to let us get any food or water. People got there at 9 in the morning, and we stayed until 5. One police officer specifically, he was trying to keep coming closer and closer to me, but I stood my ground. He wasn't touching me, I wasn't touching him. There was no reason for him to do anything to me, but he just kept moving up.
I think that it was really beautiful that at this sit-in, it was majority women that were leading it. And I think that it's rare that you find those spaces, that the people that are leading all the chants, that are coercing all the people to be in this space are predominantly women. And I think that that was a beautiful thing.
So gave them a space where they could vent about people they lost. It gave them a space to grow. It gave them space to learn about organizing, because I thought organizing was like only for adults, but now we know that we can change our lives, our communities, ourselves.
We're here. You can't silence our voices. We know that what you're doing is wrong, and we're just gonna show up and keep going against it because you're wrong. And I think that that's beautiful. Like, that shows our strength in numbers as a community, and it's something for people to see that's really important.
All right.
Wow. That was amazing, Debbie.
So Nita, Nisa, the young one who just finished, she's now 17 and is leading mass trainings for hundreds of people around the city around the idea of defunding police. And Nita, the other one who is a little bit older, she's 20 now. And she's been organizing something called Nita's Love Train, where once a week she just collects donations and then goes and does a pop-up distribution of free diapers, free clothes, well, not really clothes, but baby clothes maybe, free food, free masks and hand sanitizer, because they're so expensive. And so really just trying to make sure people have what they need to be safe. So Nita's been organizing those all summer. But just
so Debbie, I meant to ask earlier, and that video leads right into it, and your whole experience in Chicago leads into what has become a phrase of this movement is defund the police.
Yeah.
Now, middle class folks freak out when they hear that, and it's become politicized, and so all that. But when you put it in the stark terms of when you first came to Chicago, you saw the draining of resources from neighborhoods that needed resources, closing schools, closing after school activity, and everything that goes with that, after school activities, parks, recreation, all the activities for kids. And is anyone surprised you need more policing? So the connection that not everyone's getting, and defund the police is maybe, like I said, it's become politicized, but that's what you're saying is let's invest in communities. Let's invest in young people. Let's invest in schools. Let's invest in neighborhoods.
Right. And use that money because it's so much money. When I moved to Chicago, I haven't actually looked at it recently. I think I started tracking the CPD budget in 2014. And in 2014, it was around 1.3 billion. And this year, the budget that they passed was 1.8 billion. So we've seen an increase of $500 million towards the Chicago Police Department since Laquan McDonald was murdered, right?
And how much did they save by closing those schools?
I mean, the city didn't save any money from closing those schools because the schools are funded through the state.
Right. But I mean,
for the mental health clinics, they saved $3 million by closing 6 of the city's 12 mental health clinics in 2012. Right. So one day of policing could have kept 6 clinics open. And we knew people who died as a result of those clinics closing. So I'm very deep in sort of some of the impacts, right, that policing have on young people. And I've sort of used most of this time to share some of that, right? Trying to just convey some of the depth and gravity of just like the violence that people experience. That's not just the sensational violence. The problem isn't just police killings. The problem is that communities don't have what they need to be well. So defund the police is, I think, an important phrase. It's bold, so it scares some people, but it's only half of the demand. We don't just want to defund the police. There has to be investments made in communities.
Great question came from Ro, a member of our church, and she said, demographics changing. Whites will be a minority in this country within 20 to 30 years. And is there some anxiety rippling through the country, recognizing that things are going to change one way or the other? And America isn't going to look like it did in 1950. in 2050. So any thoughts on demographic shifts and those macro shifts? And
yeah, I mean, I think Trump is weaponizing that too, right? He's trying to get white people to think that we should be scared of demographics changing, as opposed to recognizing that people are people, right? Like what the issues, the reasons that we live in such a violent society is because our government is so violent. We have had the worst, if this pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's that the sanctity of life is not a thing for the people in charge here, right? And obviously Trump is like the worst iteration of that. But this has been policy for a really, really long time, right? With the war on drugs was actually a war on people who use drugs instead of seeing drugs as a public health issue, which it absolutely was, right? People needed treatment, not prison. A war on poverty, right? So crimes of survival have led to prison instead of recognizing people should be able to survive. Now we live in 2020 with the convergence of all of those things. And I think it's terrifying to think about the ways that particularly white people with racist ideologies are going to weaponize our changing demographics in this country to continue to promote violence, be it overt violence, like we saw in Charlottesville, like we've seen with the repression of protests right now. In Portland. But there's also still the sort of the hidden violence, the structural violence of who gets to access resources and who doesn't, right? You have to have money in order to get the things that you need to survive. And there's so many hoops you have to jump through to get money in this society.
Well, Debbie, of course, there's many more issues we could and should tackle. But help us think about, as a church, and as individuals, I've had several people in the chat, what can we do? Give us 2 or 3 steps, things we can do as a church. What can I do? How do I get involved? So just some thoughts. There's no easy answers there, but.
Oh, but that's the fun part, right? Is just do, right? So I think it's great that you've got the signs up. You have an active prison ministry, which is incredibly important. Some other things to think about, right, is could the church come up with a plan for what you'll do in the event of certain crises? If someone broke into the church, are you going to call the police, or are you going to think of a different response? Right? Coming up with alternatives to calling the police is still one of the most urgent things that I think, especially predominantly white communities, can do, because anytime you bring police anywhere, you're actually bringing violence, right? They have guns, and potentially making the situation less safe for other people, right? I mean, so there's some ideas. Wherever you have access, whatever institutions you're in, can you think about crisis response sort of systems that maybe try to avoid calling the police until the last possible moment, right? We recognize that, like, we don't actually have an alternative to 911. So I'm never going to tell someone who's especially like experienced sort of direct physical violence firsthand, I'm not going to tell them how they should respond to that, but I am going to ask them if there's things I can do to support them, right? If I'm in their presence. I think there's what money can you leverage to support movements? It's no small thing to give donations, right? Donations to organizations that are leading campaigns to try to win racial justice victories, but also donations to individuals that are trying to get by. I mean, I think it's both incredibly sad that GoFundMe is as popular as it is in our society. Like it's become our de facto health insurance, right? And at the same time, I'm constantly moved by how much people give, and actually leveraging what power you have monetarily is really, really important. And who else do you know that could leverage money and could leverage resources? Opening up the spaces that you're in for other people to use. join actions. And I think really try to be wary in this moment of people who say there's a good way to protest and there's a bad way to protest. Because at the end of the day, right, it's what the ways that we've seen change happen in this country usually make people uncomfortable, right? White women got the vote by chaining themselves to things and breaking things. The civil rights movement was involved a lot of arrests and civil disobedience and discomfort for white people to have to confront. And I do think a big part of why so many people know George Floyd's name is not actually because of the video. There's been other videos. Videos go viral, they come and go. It's because people responded at such an extreme level that they couldn't be ignored, right?
Right.
MLK said, riot is the language of the unheard. And
right, I thought maybe that'd be important to say specifically, Debbie. I tried to say it frankly in a sermon that I've been angry in my life to where I felt like smashing something.
Yeah.
You know, it just, something happens and that's human nature. You rage needs to go somewhere. So to see a community enraged do some damage to their own community, we think how illogical, you burn down your own store. But we got to understand it in the context of
right.
Rage. It's rage and it has to go somewhere.
And in many instances, people have already exhausted the sort of formal channels, right? We're in City Hall all the time. That doesn't, you can't win with one strategy alone. And so I think that's something to really be mindful of right now, is especially as we get closer to the election, we're going to see more and more trying to say, oh, well, there's bad protesters. They broke things. They deserve to be locked up. And that actually is a distraction from what we're facing in this moment. What are the stakes of this moment? Because they are huge.
And Debbie, just that federal courthouse in Portland, I know that building. I was in court there. That building is new and it's a fortress. I mean, those protesters, all they've done is spray graffiti on it. They cannot hurt that building. It is an absolute marble concrete fortress. So it was graffiti, and it was, it was vandalism. It was, there's protesters out front for weeks, but they weren't gonna hurt that building. Let me tell you, it is one solid, giant building, and it's new and it was beautiful, and it was empty. Think of the resources that went into building that building, and it has one trial for 5 minutes a day. It's just not a very busy courthouse.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But
A couple more really sharp questions that I want to get to, but were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, so I feel like the question of what can we do is like the possibilities are actually endless. But I think what's most important is you figure out what do you have to offer, right? And use that, because we don't, like, money is great, but also every single person knows other people. And how are you bringing people with you? Are you creating opportunities for other people to join you? Change is collective. It's not individual, right? We need collective change. And so what I'm able to do by myself isn't nearly as meaningful as what we're able to do together. And so, donate, right? Read things and support, but also try to figure out what other ways can we like show that sharing is caring, right? Can you open up your home to someone who just got out of prison? Can you offer rides home from protests for people who just got pepper sprayed? Can you do jail support for people who just got, again, the possibilities are endless. And I think a great place to look, if folks aren't already familiar, is called Showing Up for Racial Justice.
I love that expression you and the young people use. Just show up, just showing up.
Yeah. And because then other new opportunities will become apparent to you, right? And there isn't a one size fit all, but just starting to show up can certainly make a difference.
Can you throw up that, what is it, showup.com or something?
Surge, yeah. Let me grab it.
Yeah, great.
What was the other question though? Then
two really good questions here, Debbie. One is, what is your thought on restorative justice? Is it kind of a movement? We had a presentation at the church even a few months ago, back pre-COVID, when we could meet in a classroom, and the presenter was talking about restorative justice. And we like the concept, but we're frustrated to think, how do you get traction with that? And it's up to judges to do alternative sentencing and this and that. But what do you think about restorative justice? Is that a helpful piece in this
Absolutely.
whole? Yeah.
I think there's ways we have to be careful again about co-optation. And so the kind of restorative justice that I've been trained in, right? It can't be something you're forced into, right? You can't force healing or accountability on anyone, right? And prison doesn't offer that either, right? You could sit in prison for 5 years, and as soon as you get out, go do the same thing you did before you went in, right? Yeah. Healing and accountability are choices, right? But you have to create opportunities for people to make those choices. And to me, that's what restorative justice does. It tries to say what actually happened, who is actually impacted, and why did it happen, and how can we try to speak to the root causes of what happened. And so a lot of the young people that I've built with are themselves circle keepers, right? One of the main things they're advocating for around getting police out of schools is to get more restorative justice practitioners into schools. I don't think it's not a one size fit all. It can't deal with every conflict, but it's a huge shift in paradigm away from crime and punishment, and instead looking at harm and healing, right? Because at the end of the day, crime isn't as upsetting to me as harm, right? Mm-hmm. I care if someone's hurt, not if something is lost, right? Mm-hmm. Like an object, right? Objects mm-hmm. can be replaced, but it's that mm-hmm. hurt that gets caused that we have to reconcile. Mm-hmm. And our criminal legal system doesn't offer that, mm-hmm. right? And so restorative justice is a really, really important paradigm that some really brilliant leaders are trying to implement.
Interesting what happened in Oklahoma recently, that the Supreme Court said the eastern half of the state really is Cherokee Nation. And you've shared with me examples of how indigenous communities have ways of dealing with perpetrators of various crimes rather than our system, mm-hmm. the mainline system, coming in and arresting someone and sending them off to prison.
Yeah.
And that was the issue there, was they were trying to arrest someone and the nation was saying, no, we'll deal with it.
Word. So. Yeah, and any restorative justice training that you go to will honor and acknowledge that many of these practices come from different indigenous communities.
Great.
For sure.
One more really, really excellent question, Debbie, and I know I struggle with it, is someone who has a lot of police in her family and very defensive when this conversation comes up. Any suggestions around how to begin that conversation, or resources, or it's just a tough, if you got family, you've got friends, you've got people are just defensive for the police and no police, and there's good cops and that whole thing.
I think that one thing that I would try to say, right, is that we're talking about the system of policing, right? And often that ends up getting directed at individual officers because they're out here and they're in people's faces and in people's lives. But at the end of the day, it's the system of policing that is itself a problem, and is itself a symptom of a society that was built on injustice. And that feels like an important shift away from saying, oh, well, every single police officer is a racist. That's not the issue. Policing in and of itself comes from a racist system. I can only imagine that that's hard. Some of our youth leaders have cops in their families too, and they, talk about how it's a struggle all the time, and they argue all the time, or they feel sort of shut down a lot. And I think the other thing is, we have to decide where we put our energy. Is it arguing with someone, trying to convince them to not be a cop anymore? Or is it recognizing, okay, I'm gonna, when I have energy for this, I'm gonna spend it building with other people that agree with me. But I just think that's an important distinction.
It's
The
the system of policing.
right.
Yeah.
And
the way
yeah, and I think another thing that's been really important, right, you know, I think something that's really painful about this idea of like blue lives matter, right, is police officers are choosing to wear a badge and hold a gun. That's a choice, and it's not, Black people don't get to choose that, like, that they're Black, right? And like police, I mean, I've seen some clever signs at protests, right, that are like, I'm Black 24/7, you're blue from 9 to 5. And that there's an important difference there. But yeah. And again, just at the end of the day, there's sort of, we just have to think about power, and how do we look at who has it and who doesn't, and how do we shift things so that everybody has what they need to be well and be whole.
Oh, beautiful. Debbie, I think we're getting to a place where maybe we can wrap it up. That last comment came in on the chat was, there is a surge chapter in Westchester, and so we can investigate that and get involved. And boy, Debbie, you've had good suggestions, powerful experience, so much more we could talk about. And remind everyone of the disclaimer we said. We didn't mean to get political, but it's life is political, isn't it? But these are our views, Debbie's views, my views. But as a church, we do certainly want to be a part of moving towards ever greater justice for all, racial justice, and we do believe Black Lives Matter to God and to us. So thank you, Debbie, for sharing these thoughts tonight. We'll continue to have conversations. I know we've got some people in our church that really know the history of racism in this country, especially going back into slavery and Reconstruction. And so we're going to explore those issues. We want to come out the other end of this with, yes, better informed, and that's a pretty typical Presbyterian thing. Okay, let's study it. But out of that, being informed, maybe eyes opened to new possibilities and new ways of engaging with our community and the nation and the world. So thank you, my dear. Love you.
That's great. Love you too.
Yeah. God.
Thank you.
God be with you. And any last thoughts you want to share with us? Send us out with some wisdom. Something from one of a story, just a quick story from one of your young people that's inspired you.
Have I told you one recently that I should retell?
So many. Sorry, I put you on the spot. I was just, maybe one thought that came to mind a minute ago was, we didn't talk because we meant to prepare a few days ago. I thought, oh, we didn't talk about COVID, how COVID's impacted this. And you sent me something. I just broke down that night in tears with. You sent me a list, and I was scrolling down that list, trying to find the end of it with people asking for help. You know, somebody created a forum of a community exchange for help. Yeah. And we need help. We've lost our job. We've lost our healthcare. We've got this, we got that. And it was an endless list. And it's people. And it's the people we're talking about that are victims of the system in one way or another. It hasn't impacted our church community all that much. Yes, some families have been impacted more than others, but most of us are going to get through this okay. But to see how that dramatic impact COVID has had. Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, a young person who's actually been staying with me for the last couple of months, his catchphrase, right, is "We all we got." And I think that phrase sums up a heck of a lot, especially for communities that have been sort of at best ignored by the power structure and at worst targets of. And I think, you know, that list I sent you was a mutual aid effort. It's trying to say that our government has shown that all people are not gonna be the beneficiaries, right, of this system. And so it's kind of up to us to look out for each other. And I say us to mean sort of multiracial masses who want to believe that like things can be different and things can be better, and that starts by taking care of each other and showing up for each other.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's let that be the last.
Yeah, just
we all we got.
We all we got, and no one's coming to save us. And if no one's coming to save us, but change is coming. So which side of it do we want to be on? That's
really important. Yeah. Thank you. Someone said, "God bless you, Debbie," in the chat.
Thank you.
We're proud of you. Thank you. It was great.
Good night, everyone.
More chat coming in. I said 25 to 30. I think that's exactly where we were, somewhere between 25 and 30. You joined us tonight.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. God bless. Good night. More later. We all we got.
Good night.